Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here, and in my continuing review and in-depth research into the Presidio child molestation case against two people, a Hambright and Michael Aquino, an officer at the time at that base. Now, to recap things, as we get into all this information, as usual, things are very difficult to prove. You're talking about witnesses that are 2 and 3 years old. Now, this is just an unbelievably difficult situation to get any valid information from. Well, I've had some minor contact with molestation victims, a previous girlfriend who was molested by her father as a young child. These things are very traumatic. So if a child doesn't walk around normal after that, they also have horrible physical trauma from it because you're literally ripping and hurting. The pain of a sexual assault on a young child, just because of the physicality of it, is mind-boggling. So this is all something that we need to understand, and there seems to be none of that proof. Matter of fact, there's no proof whatsoever. There's allegations by untrustworthy people that are seeking large amounts of money. Now, we are here to seek the Christ consciousness, the gnosis of the situation. What is the truth? Going after red herrings lets the actual perpetrators, if there are any, escape. And while everybody's headhunting, who are odd, unusual people, the real culprits get away with it. And there's many issues, and this comes to anything you research, anything in life, no matter what it is, it gets down to the corruption of the issue. Plain and simple. We have free energy, we have cures for everything. Why aren't they being used? Well, I ask you that. Why aren't they being used if they are there and able to be used instantly at low cost, etc.? So, we have a problem with society here. And it's not going to help society if we continue to headhunt people who may or may not be innocent. But let's go through some fascinating things here. And this particular... Well, if you want to get into, I could spend hours and hours going to English. Nobody cares. It's hard to describe in a forum like this. So if you want to do this, go to Kindle and get their monthly program for $10, and you can read all his books online. And these can even be downloaded in the Kindle monthly program, and it'll cost you $10. So even if you take 3 months for $30, you could read everything that he's written, including this if you want to go over it. But it's very confusing. I don't think that the descriptions of what happened here are very well written. It is pretty confusing. That all of these things, what happened and not happened, but the bottom line is you really don't have to go into the details of it. It comes down to plain and simple. I'm going to go into fascinating information and details that may have some value about learning who this guy was, what he's up to, etc., and what was going on, period. The bottom line is that no charges were ultimately placed on either Aquino or this other person at there. Plain and simple, they were charged with things, their charges were dropped, everything was dropped from everybody. So we either have a serious problem with the legal system of being corrupt, inept, and everything else. Oh, what a surprise that would be. Or there was little or no value to these charges, period. Now, suing people in big companies is something people do all the time, and people think it's easy. Well, it's not really easy, and you better have the right people, but it certainly, deep pockets helps. And when it comes down to it, people involved, particularly government agencies, individual people, even celebrities and so forth, find out that it's much easier to pay somebody off, I should say, easier and cheaper, and get rid of it from your life, especially if you have the money, to just pay them off. So if you go to court and fight it, you're going to spend millions of dollars fighting this case. So should you give that person $500,000 or $300,000, saving yourself 70% of the cost? Well, that's the smart thing to do. And that's what everybody does when it comes to these big cases. It's let's make it go away. We're going to spend the money defending ourselves. Let's just pay this person off and move on. That's the real world. So the real world is where it's all out and all at, and you got to understand that. So it doesn't matter whether you're innocent, doesn't matter if you're guilty. Let's make it go away and let's cut our costs, because in the end, you can go for some ego thing that you want to win, but you're going to pay a big price for that. And is it worth it? You also get endless years of publicity because you're still fighting this in court, and everything goes on record and everybody can see it, and it becomes a great emburdenment. So let's also look at the person who, now Aquino was only accused of molesting one child at this particular daycare center, so it states here. Now, the other person that was involved here with him was accused of possibly molesting 50 or 60 children there, of which all the charges were eventually dropped. There was no great outbreak of venereal diseases, a certain case of chlamydia apparently, but this was really not properly substantiated. The tests done, which were inadequate and terrible, showed we don't really know if they were valid. We do know that the person accused of this, not Aquino, was found not to have chlamydia, plain and simple. So let's understand that. He was never accused of molesting a whole bunch of people, Aquino. He was basically on this one child. And there's all sorts of gossip. And I don't want to hear gossip. People talk gossip about me all the time. People have went out there and particularly establishment, law enforcement, etc., went out there and spread lies about me to shut me up because of their criminality. So it goes on and on with all these people. Now, if you're going to believe things, if you're going to be so weak-kneed, so weak-minded, that you believe every rumor done by basically people that can't figure out how to really research their own name, then you're going to be a fool, and you're going to be following fools, and you come out as a dummy, like following idiots that have no credibility whatsoever. And quite frankly, that's almost everybody out there. I still have not found a valid researcher out there that has stated anything 100% correctly. These are people that even claim to be professionals. They are plain and simple that people do very poor work and they find what they want to find so that they can feel like a big shot. Yeah, I know this, I know that. And of course, it makes good headlines for their books and radio and TV type shows. So we got to understand all that these people have access to grind. They don't get the complete picture. They're not researching the subject matter to find out what the truth is. And even when people contact them, like myself, and I'm not the only one out there that can be contacted, but I have contacted people directly, they refuse to get proper information and discuss issues so they actually look better. And so they have information that can assist them in finding the truth. But they don't want truth. They want headlines. Remember that. The headline is Satanist army guy. Now, I don't have a great love or interest in Michael Aquino. I always find these people to be kind of strange, that they change sides, that somehow because the corrupt system is bad, that you're going to be the opposite of it. And there is a certain logic and understanding there. So if the system is corrupt and they say this guy over here is so bad, well, that's the opposition though. So if you want to be opposite corruption, you join another person or thing or entity that is corrupt. But no, they're not really corrupt. They're just the opposition. The good guys, or bad guys, up is down, left is right. The good guys apparently are just slandering and telling you lies about the bad guy who actually is the good guy. And of course, this has been stated of what the Masons believe with the Luciferian attitude, is that Lucifer came down here, helped mankind, and God just wanted you as kind of his little slave that just wanted you to not grow and follow. And to a large extent, all religions teach that. You're not supposed to think on your own. You're supposed to be guided by God, not enforce what you think you have out of life. Now, I got this finally because I always wondered why religion in particular, but I heard an actual priest talk about why getting involved in any kind of metaphysics, witchcraft, etc. was bad. And it had nothing to do with the entities or energy being bad. It was the fact that you're trying to put your will above God. You should be submissive to God and let him take your life and do what he wants with it because he knows what's right for you. So that's the basic nonsense. And of course, you listen to Christians, I would say, give your life to Jesus. Let Jesus guide you. Let all that. Well, I think that happens, but the bottom line is you also want to direct your life. So it gets to be complicated of thinking that. I don't, if your life was good, you wouldn't have to empower it. If things were going right, you wouldn't have to think of things to do it. Frankly, you wouldn't need a church. If God was guiding you daily on the correct and right path, well, what's the point? Why do you need to learn anything, follow the Bible or anything else? You're always going to make the right decisions because you technically have reached a level of Christ consciousness, gnosis, the Buddha head, whatever you want to call it. You would then not need any help. Well, that's not the case at all. The most corrupt people are those that claim they're guided by God. And then they tell you that. I mean, it just goes on and on how ridiculous it is, all the ministers and all the priests. And, it's amazing how we have investigations of this individual, regardless of how clean or dirty it is, when we know for a fact that there are thousands, tens of thousands of people who have been molested by a major institution out there who has covered it up. Not a single Catholic diocese has not covered up child molestation charges. They hide people away. They don't apply justice to them. And it goes on and on. You can find hundreds of cases online, and there are thousands of these. So we're headhunting this little weirdo that may or may not have doing things when we know of institutions that do this all the time. And to think that he's some ringleader for everyone, I think is the height of absurdity. And it's just, he is the fall guy. He is the red herring. He's the one everybody points to because he's the celebrity. Plain and simple. So if you want to make your allegations sound good of some sort of child abduction, child molestation, well, yeah, it was this guy, and they used the term colonel, and they identify him. Well, what about all the other people? Is he the only guy doing it? There must be thousands of people involved in all these rings we're finding out are so common. But, he's the guy they want you to go after. And they keep doing this, and it doesn't make any sense. And we all know who's involved in this. And again, even the people involved in so-called law enforcement, the more honest cops, don't seem to get it. And they still seem to be honing in on him. Why? Because it's easy. And it gives them credibility. Oh, yeah, I heard about that guy. You must know something. Yeah, you must be on the right track. No, you're on the wrong track. And it just shows you how piss poor your investigative skills are. The same thing is happening with the Process Church, which has been linked with absolutely nothing legally, and not a single charge has ever been made against them or their main members. Now, whether there were some groups doing this or that called themselves the Process Church, well, that can happen to anybody. The bottom line is that they have done nothing, and they are now a $100 million animal sanctuary program that seems to be doing good work. All the animal sanctuary, by the way, charities, are all badly managed, and they have they're top heavy with lots of management and lots of money going to individuals and for payroll instead of going to the World Wildlife Fund. Well, how could they be bad? Well, the point is they've been linked to all sorts of criminal activity, it's been alleged. And they pulled all sorts of things. And there's a very cloudy background of a Nazi that started this, that has planned all this to make money. That's what's been alleged, and it's online. I'm going to do a lecture on them as well. So let's not just start pinning the tail on the donkey of the easy target. And, again, I consider this porn news. Oh, he's a Satanist. Oh, that's porn. Oh, that's interesting. Well, the real criminals, the churches of all types, and particularly the Catholic Church with its trillions of dollars, get away with everything, including a massive amount of horrific corruption in the government that seems to support child molestation rings. And everybody wants to grab a certain individual or someone else saying that they are doing it. Michael Jackson's another one that's easy. Another guy that's pretty hard to give any credit to. He seems to have been very inappropriate with a lot of children. But, he was a mental case, and he was playing kiddie there with them. Now, did that involve sexuality? Well, I don't know. He bought a lot of people off to shut them up. People have alleged that he was in an actual child molestation ring and that he was part of it and he was helping people to do that. Well, I don't believe that at all. Where's the charges? I mean, we really have to get down to the fact. He was brought to court on the most bogus of all child molesting charges from a totally uncredible witness who was trying to extort and blackmail a whole bunch of other celebrities, so it's been alleged. And that's why that didn't work. Well, why was that taken to court? And if it's these ring of people and everybody seems to know it, and you got these reporters out there telling you they know all this and they've investigated it, yeah, I just can't say it on the radio. I can say it offline. Yeah, you can't say anything because you can't prove it. That's why. And you don't want to get into lawsuits spreading gossip. Because Billy Bob told you who works at a bakery somewhere, or he's a chauffeur, or whatever they do. And of course he's credible because he heard it from Sam, who heard it from Bill, who heard it from Mac, who heard it from Julie, who heard it from somebody else. Yeah, we all know, right? So we got to be very careful here. And this doesn't serve justice. This doesn't solve the problem. If we have problems, if you want to scream that it's because of the courts and corruption, well, then let's forget about hunting down all of these so-called molesters and start working on the problem so that we can end the problem. That means that if people aren't being brought to justice and it's happening, what is going on? We need to look into that. And certainly there's nothing being done by any noted law. There's some good law enforcement people that have tried, but they are so off the track it isn't even funny. How can you walk into, as James Rothstein stated, that he would go into New York City, into clubs, and they would have hundreds of underage children in there that were being molested, and he couldn't do anything about that? Well, then there's a problem there. And while you can always look at the fact of what's going on there, somebody's allowing that to go on. Everything is known, and it is allowed to go on because of corruption. And I've seen this on unbelievable levels myself personally that you wouldn't believe while people like this get away with everything. So this has to be understood. Well, we've got some very serious problems that have to be dealt with. Let's get back into this. But let's also understand that the main accuser here was made a main accuser against Aquino only, not against the other person who was eventually acquitted. Absolutely no charges. Absolutely nothing happened. He left the military, and that was it. And he had AIDS, and he died. And of course, it doesn't seem like there's any follow-up here, so I don't know what's going on. It seems to me that's another issue of why someone was taking care of children that apparently was HIV. But this is the typical incompetency. The records got burned for this. Isn't it interesting? And, I hear all the time, I just heard again here that someone who had records, they were stored in Building 7. The building that was like half a mile away from the Trade Center that blew up and fell down. All the records were there, including Enron and so many others. It's all gone now. Nobody has these records, and nobody seems to have any backups, extra files stuck in New Jersey somewhere. Nobody really seems to have any of that. They put it in one place, and that's it. So, this is the kind of incompetency you're looking at. So the whole idea is I've always had multi-records in multi-places since ever, because what happens if something happens to your masters? Well, you got to have them somewhere else, and it shouldn't be on your property. It should be somewhere else that won't be affected. But no, that's just, Yeah, it's common sense again. Well, what are you talking to? It's common sense? So the whole idea is that, so this guy who was accusing Aquino, basically with no information, all this kind of put together stuff, there is some interesting things, but you're talking about taking a 3-year-old and leading them through stuff and then having them regurgitate things, even down to the apparently making the horn sign that she claimed that Aquino did, which I don't know. I don't necessarily think that Aquino is using the devil sign. I don't know. Could be. It seems like a pretty low-level kind of childish thing that rock stars do. But Aquino tries to excuse that by saying, well, that's love and hand language, which it is. It's interesting that the devil sign and the what means I love you in hand language is that same horn thing. Well, kind of. The horn thing is a little bit different, but it's basically the same thing. Isn't that interesting? So that's what he says it is, but it's not true in terms of the bigger picture. We all know what that means, and this is the kind of little things he does, trying to go after every possible statement and something happens to try and make it untrue. Well, it's not untrue. And we'll get into the other things that he was accused of as well. So what we need to understand is that the probate court of California, that it was stated online someplace. And no, it's not hard to find this stuff. Very hard to find what is the outcome. You can hear about people being arrested, but what was the outcome of it? It was told that the Army denied the $3 million claim. Whereupon the complainants, the people who were seeking the money, filed suit against the Army in California court. The Army agreed to a settlement. See, here's what I mean by a settlement. So when the Army itself denied their claim and any wrongdoing whatsoever. So they didn't pay them a dime. But what you do when that happens is you then go to civil court or whatever it is. I don't want to be caught in technicalities here. I'm not an attorney of how these things work. I'm trying to explain this for the average man. So the point is that the Army didn't pay them. They didn't feel, and they could not win in court with the Army. So they had to go into the civil courts, where things, as we all have known from the O.J. Simpson and other things, well, it's very difficult to get a criminal conviction, but you can get an actual civil conviction. And that's what happened with O.J., where he got a huge amount of money was awarded to the other families, and through a civil action, because the amount of proof that anything happened is much less. So he then owed all this money, and if he ever made any money, OJ, the court would grab it and put it towards the judgment against OJ. So that's how it works, and it doesn't just work with OJ. That's how it works in general. But the Army agreed to a settlement of $334,000, $334,720. That's what their agreement, of which half went directly to the people making the complaint. The other half into a trust for the child, which was controlled by the stepfather and mother, until she was the age of 18. But and this is where the stuff gets to be a little cloudy and everything, if we can believe this stuff. So, okay, well, I just told you why that happened. So 1 month after the date of turning 18, unless the child signed the trust as a new co-trustee, her half of the claim would go to the parents. I don't know if that's common or not, but it sounds pretty manipulative of the fact of the parents trying to get it. We know what kind of problem is. Many movie stars have sued their parents who have basically taken most of their money, and they get very little out of it. You know, work for 20 years as a kid, and then you turn legal, and then all of a sudden there's nothing there because the parents have taken it all. What's also interesting is that, there's a lot of problems here. At the age of 13, the child left her mother and father and went to live with her biological father. Now, the mother was the biological mother, but the father involved in this case against Aquino was a stepfather, a military man, I believe. Was he another Christian? Which is interesting. So at the age of 13, she decided that she didn't want to stay with them there, and she wanted to go with her father. And of course, that's interesting in and to itself. Apparently, it means that she didn't have a great relationship with her mother, or maybe this was a change of scenery to get away from what was going on there and to live with a father. Could make a lot of sense. The lawyer sent her father's lawyer, a letter denying a copy of the trust. So she couldn't get a copy of the trust that was there. 28 days after the 18th birthday, when she was supposed to get the money, the parents here, her stepfather and mother, sued her to force her acceptance of its continuation. Meaning they didn't want to give her the money, and they wanted the trust to continue even past 18. if the trust continued, and listen to the kind of stuff here. Is this a victimized child where they're trying to give her money so she can get over her life, maybe make a better life because she has $100,000 and maybe she can buy a house and have children or whatever it is, and you would willingly give it? After all, you got 150, 60 grand yourself, which in that period of time was a fairly good chunk of money. So it's not like, back then in the 90s and so forth, probably equivalent 400 or 500 today. So, and there's certainly, you could do a lot with that. Nobody knows what they did with it or whatever. And we're talking about the parents here. But if she continued it, she would not get personal control of it until she reached the age 50. So she continued this, and we don't know what the reason for this was or not. And we've seen this with celebrities today where people come in and control them, take their money. Well, it's their money. They should have it. And to continue the trust until you're 50 is ridiculous. I mean, that's basically your entire adult life where you need money to buy things you want, houses, etc. Well, now it's you're 50. What are you supposed to do? It's like 30 years later. If she did not accept this demand, all the trust money would be immediately paid to the parents. And this is the stepfather and her mother. I mean, listen, what kind of nonsense is this? It shows a very nasty attitude towards this money and towards this child. So again, is this all real? Is this actually what happened? I don't know. We assume it is, since he's actually written it here, and he was very well prepared with this book to be sued, so he made sure he put everything in here that could be verified, so he has stated. So basically, the child filed a counterclaim to his parents' attorney for aiding and abetting their breach of financial duties. She prevailed in court. The trust was dissolved, and she received $260,000, which is interesting. She got more than she should have. So that was a nice little thing for her, because if the settlement was $334,720, she got out of it in the end $260,000. Which included damages for this. So somebody did a good deal here. The judge reacted to this horrific screwing of a child out of their needed monies for medical, psychiatrist, life in general, made this family pay for their lies and deceit. So, I mean, it shows their attitude quite strongly here. And I think it's very, very important to note that. So, because people have said, have people in these cases been awarded money? Well, I just went over why. It's better to settle and give people money than go to court. Now, the Army could have given them money on their claim because they had such a great claim, but they didn't. And that would have been $3 million compared to settling for $334,000. Big difference there, isn't it? Which would you rather have, $3 million or $334,000? Well, it's a big savings, and that doesn't add in all the court fees and other things that have to be paid in fighting cases like that. So that's why people are awarded things. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a valid case. And of course, as a person suing, this is the kind of position you want to put a company in, where they have to settle with you. So you're guaranteed getting some money, and you're hoping that this is a large enough chunk of change that it is worth doing that. So the bottom line is they didn't get the $3 million they wanted. The Army turned them down. They had to re-sue them. Well, if they had such a great claim, then why didn't the Army pay? Why didn't they pursue it? Well, because they didn't. They had a bunch of nonsense, speculative information, no hard information whatsoever. I'm going to get into that in the fascinating areas that went into here. But this is a very important aspect of this so-called case. And I want to get into the fun things and the other issues. I'm probably going to make this particular segment longer than most. We'll see. So it's important you understand the facts and figures there. Aquino states that if this child was so abducted, raped, and sodomized, that he thinks that the Army would have been happy to pay the $3 million. I don't think so. I think that it puts them open to a whole bunch of other things. But this is the kind of thing he likes to extrapolate on, trying to further bolster his position. It's never good to pay anybody, even if they are right, because it opens up legal doors that are very difficult to shut. So I think that's very interesting. So it talks about what happened there. Now, as I said, with Hambright, who was accused of 60 or so molestations, came down to one. That one molestation, which he was finally charged with, was ultimately dropped. Nothing was gone against him. Only one molestation charge was presented against Michael Aquino, and that was basically dropped as well. And the case involving that with the military was turned down by them, and a civil suit they were able to claim things on. So that's what we looked at. But again, there doesn't seem to be any criminal problems here or anything linking Aquino to this horrible case, which you think would have caused all sorts of things if it was really there. But it really, all of these allegations don't add up. Now, the whole idea is that a 3-year-old knew where his apartment was, knew his special entrance. Now, I've said this in several lectures that I had, is very suspicious. But I had no idea of the age of this child. I thought it was much older than that. But you're talking about a 3-year-old, and that was directed and does whatever the adults around them do. But it also didn't have these very trauma realities. I don't think you could take a 3-year-old near a building where she was tortured in. And you're talking about, as I've mentioned, the physical, painful damage of these type of things, not to mention the trauma as well. So I frankly doubt that that child wouldn't be screaming and yelling and running around. So it doesn't add up to me. It seems to me that they were all of this was guided, implanted in there, a reality, etc. The fact that she identified him as a 3-year-old in general, I have problems with as well. So we just don't know here. Do you remember what people look like? I don't remember those things. To think that you're getting excellent information from a traumatized person to begin with, and a 3-year-old, which at the time I think was 2 years old, I think is the epitome of bad thinking. Now, a particular officer, the name of Sandra C. Daly, policewoman with badge number 1918, wrote a report to her captain, Daniel Murphy, badge number 647, about the Temple of Set under the, I don't know what, this is kind of strange. Why did they, everything is always weird. Now, there's her actual complete police report. Assuming this is the original report that he got and republished here. And it says here, "Dear Sir," meaning her captain, approximately 2 weeks ago, information was received in San Francisco's Fisherman's Wharf area. Why you'd want to do it there, I don't know. It's kind of a public place. Now, the whole idea is that there was a report made on the Temple of Set by a particular police officer. I think I had my mic off, so let me repeat this. Sandra C. Daly, badge number 1918, to her captain, badge number 647, and Daniel Murphy. And why they would even state it like this, I don't know. It says, "Sir, approximately 2 weeks ago, information was received that a satanic cult named the Temple of Set would be holding a black mass in San Francisco's Fisherman Wharf area. The following background information has been obtained on the cult." Now, that they're just doing this? How bizarre. They don't know what's going on, any of this? Well, I'll get into my personal experiences with the San Francisco Police Department from my aspect, and also from a person who owned a cult shop there, which is a fun little story as well. Now, but all of a sudden they're doing it. Why the Fisherman's Wharf is a big commercial area where there's restaurants and everything else. I've been there a couple of times. I'm trying to remember if there's any place to do that. I mean, there are large parking lots near there, but I don't know where you would do that. And there isn't like a beach place there or anything. The wharf's right on the ocean, if I remember correctly, and there are restaurants and things around their shops, etc. So I don't know what they would be doing there to begin with. So it just sounds to me like this is kind of a silly thing. They're just finding an excuse to make this report now, of course. How typically backwards and, the horse has left the barn and they're closing the door trying to figure out what happened. So she goes ahead and reports what the temple. Now, the Temple of Set is a satanic group under the leadership of Michael Aquino. It is a splinter group of the Church of Satan. They separated from LaVey's organization in 1975. There are several hundred members, and it operates on a national level under Aquino's leadership. Under Aquino's leadership are a council of 9 lieutenants. Now, so far, that's all basically right. The Temple of Set is seemingly obsessed with the military. They have a fascination with the Nazi movement, and many of them wearing on occasion World War II German uniforms and insignia. A more sinister aspect of their military fascination is the fact that Aquino holds a commission as a major in the United States Army Reserve. And here's what Aquino answers to all that. Now, he answers that the Temple of Set has never conducted a black mass, which is basically a reverse Christian mass. A satire of the Christian mass at any of its activities. Such rituals would be performed only for an individual's benefit as a disintoxication from prior religions, indoctrination, and intimidation. Which is strange. But again, that doesn't even make sense. We don't do it, but sometimes we do it. Is that what that says? I don't know what that means. But generally, once they got away from the Church of Satan, they became this quasi Middle Eastern sect, otherwise known as Egyptian demon of Set. So they don't get involved in any of that other stuff. But, that's what they were based in. Satan and the only reason he left the Church of Satan is because he didn't like that Anton LaVey was trying to make some bucks out of it and kind of demoting his stature. That's the only reason he left. He didn't leave over the controversy of anything whatsoever there. He started something that, instead of copying the Church of Satan, decided to go off into this realm of Set, which he feels was the original Satan and so forth. Of course, coming from the older, more Arabic culture of the Egyptians, or at least the Middle Eastern culture. So that's where it comes from. Certainly doesn't connect to, well, it does connect to his Aryan roots because Aryans come from Iran. But that's another issue. But he's denying that. And he further goes on and states that as above, the Temple of Set is not a satanic organization or religion, since it considers Judeo-Christianity mythology, including Satan, as inaccurate and irrelevant. Whoa. That's a pretty strong statement for somebody who was involved in and helped running and formulated the entire Church of Satan based under this. So, again, he loved Anton LaVey. He was so smart and so everything else, except he was a filthy slob, did horrible things, didn't write anything, copied everything for the Satanic Bible. I mean, it goes on and on with the attacks on Anton LaVey, which in his physical interviews on the radio, or I should say on YouTube, states how he just loved this guy, and that anybody who would criticize him in front of me was in for a big fight. But the bottom line is just not true at all. I mean, he didn't respect any of his thoughts, any of his philosophies, and completely when he broke away, which he didn't really try too hard to work with him, even though he claims that, but he really didn't. He didn't try and mend fences and put things back or offer ways of making money and talk to him. But they weren't close, plain and simple. And he likes to say he was, but he didn't even believe in the general tenets of the Church of Satan whatsoever. He had a completely different belief system, trying to make it much more sophisticated, other than, I'm Satan, we want to hump and take drugs and all this stuff. He wanted to make it a officers' club of Set with a sophisticated understanding of the world and philosophy. That's what he did to Satanism. Which certainly is a good idea. He wanted to attract a better class of people instead of the hoodlums, the bikers, the deviates, the criminals that were very much part of the Church of Satan at that time, including apparently one of the members of the Manson family. But what does that mean? He had a card. Was he working with the church? I said none of these people. They have casual contact with the group, and then the group, because of this, is labeled as being terrible. And he talks about the Council of Nine and the Temple of Set's corporate board of directors, to which the high priest is responsible as corporate president. So he's claiming that, of course, this is a corporation, and the Council of Nine is nothing more than corporate people. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you got to really scratch your head. He wants to respond to everything and get down to the letter of these statements instead of really what the meaning of it is. He has 9 people that run the Temple of Set as their main governing people, and it's as simple as that. So to clarify, this is jokey. He also states that the temple has no interest in or involvement with the military. Is that comical? He's a military officer. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I look back at and said, are you a boob? Why are you answering this to make yourself look like a stooge? So, there has been no such articles in its publication nor books on its reading list that are military based, apparently. Well, that I think is wrong as well. There are some. Daly's, the officer that wrote this, Sandra, sole basis for this claim seems to be that 3 members of the Temple of Set, of the temple's hundreds, which is being generous. I don't know how many hundreds that happen also to be members in the U.S. Army Reserve. Oh, let's change that. Officers working with him. Oh, there's no military influence. The fact that he is even filmed holding and glorifying a SS dagger, which God knows how many children that murdered, and the energy that would be in these foul group of Arabs that murdered and tortured people for literally hundreds of years. But of course, in that instance in particular, is kind of comical. Now, he's not into that. He's not into Nazism. He's not into the military. He just happens to be an officer all his life. And high-ranking people that are working with him just happen to be officers as well. I think there were anywhere from 3 to 5 additional military officers, including himself, not including, with 3 plus himself, at least were involved that I'm aware of. Again, these figures are hard to figure out, and I'm not going to spend hours trying to do that. But we do know that there were 4 to 6 military officers at the Presidio, including with him being extra, meaning 7 or more, involved in his church. Now, this has been stated before as well. He also wants to follow that up that the temple has never held activities in which German military or Nazi uniforms or insignias were worn or displayed. The reason is, again, quite simply that the Setian philosophy of individualism is completely incompatible with fascist principles. Well, again, this is the kind of conflicting outrageousness when you try and make the bad guy the good guy and the good guy the bad guy and up is down, left is right. When you get into these philosophies, it's how you get very confused. Even in the information that was taken from his apartment that was seized by the police, part of what was seized there was a bunch of videotapes of documentaries of the Nazis. He clearly went into the fact of how he spent time and what a great chap Himmler was, and how only a few hundred people died over there instead of 15,000 people that died fixing up his rat hole over there. He walks around even on TV with an SS dagger, but there's no interest in that whatsoever. Well, he's your typical military guy, and there's a huge amount of these people that are interested in that and have some bizarre understanding and bizarre glorification of the Nazis, who are some of the scummiest filth on the planet. And there's just endless reams of the horrible atrocities they committed. And he even wants to say that. It's also interesting that he is a military officer, yet he wants freedom and he wants individualism. And of course, he showed that by releasing a whole bunch of information, not saying that he can't say anything because he would be in big, big trouble about his particular stuff that happened at Cheyenne Mountain and pretty much everything else. He doesn't really disclose anything he's done that I've found quite yet. He's got more books to go through. Many more, but he talks about nothing he did in Vietnam other than making a spooky tape that supposedly scared some Vietnamese if you could broadcast it in fields. I'm not sure you could even hear that when the shooting starts because you're not going to hear a broadcast like that. So, that's right out of Apocalypse Now. You're not going to hear that in the battle zone. Anybody who's ever shot guns and everything else knows how loud they are and how you can't hear anything. And generally in warfare, you're not wearing earmuffs as professional shooters do when you're shooting guns so you can hear something afterwards. You generally don't do that because you're trying to hear what's going on. So, to state that, and to state that that they are so independent, and he's in an organization that is about as fascist as you can get, called the military. See, this is the kind of contradictory stuff that I always run into. It don't make any sense, and everything that's said, he's trying to counter with some really bogus argument. For him to state that he wasn't highly motivated, and there's a lot of other things we're going to here as well. And he's got a whole Nazi group of magic. Part of the Temple of Set is the Order of the Trapezoid, which he stole from, guess where? The Church of Satan, which he doesn't believe anything in. But they apparently had a Nazi magic group. This was, again, started yet again, or even took the name, I think, of the Trapezoid Order, which is Nazi magical. And it was headed by Edred Flowers, otherwise known as Edred Thorson, who wrote all these rune books. So this is just absurd to think that there was an interest there when he has a whole division of the Temple of Set. One of them is devoted to this. And see, people don't know that. That's why it's so important that a person like me, who knows what this organization was doing, can report this stuff. No one else would know that. Her report goes on to say that with his specialty being military intelligence, he purports to his members that he reports directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, although this is probably a gross exaggeration. I'm sure it is, but, all military do that. Their commander-in-chief is the president, so isn't that who you ultimately give your information to? Yeah, not really, because they're probably never going to read that, but that's who it's designed to go to. What else is it? So, that's a little bit. In fact, however, that he holds a major's commission and deals in the areas of military intelligence is a fact. One of the organization's lieutenants, a female named Willie Browning, allegedly is a captain in the United States Army Reserve, and Willie is a female name, she's saying. So I guess Willie is it's a military thing. And an intelligent unit, and in an intelligent unit in Los Angeles. Another lieutenant, Dennis Mann, is also a reserve officer involved in intelligence. So we know of two people that they named here that are part of his council of Goobahs. One of them is Willie Browning. Apparently has an intelligent unit out of Los Angeles. And, of course, this Dennis Mann, who was, I believe, at the Presidio. So we know already two of these, and of course, where are they? What are they involved in? We have no pictures of them. We don't know. They could be doing all sorts of things. But everybody wants to pin things on Aquino, and if he's smart, obviously other people are going to be involved in these things. So these are people we need to watch, look at, what did they do, what is their military record, to find out some answers. The following background information was obtained on Michael Aquino. So he was born 10/16, 1956. His residence is 123 Acme Avenue, San Francisco. I don't know if that's a real address. Generally, 123 Acme. Isn't that at the Roadrunner? So, the actual reverse directory shows a listing for a Betty Ford at this location. So the idea is that property, or the ownership of that property, is in the name of Betty Ford, his mother. It further goes on to give some data, which I think is interesting. Apparently, he's 6 foot. Exactly. He's 145 pounds. He has brown hair, green eyes. And again, showing a address of a P.O. box in San Francisco is what was on his driver's license at that time. You can no longer do that in California, from what I understand. He shows that, and another little interesting fact here, and that's why you got to read everything. There is a subject is listed as the registered owner of a 1979 Mercury wagon with the California license plate EPR, which is a rank in the Temple set. Current motor vehicle records list this vehicle as junk in June of 1979. However, they issued a duplicate plate on the same vehicle in August 1979. Now, we'll get into what Aquino says about this, but you think they would have got that right if they were a police department. Again, sketchy vehicles, and I don't remember him mentioning, I'd have to look that up, that he, because he lists all of his autos. I don't remember him listing that 1979 Mercury wagon. Isn't that interesting? I'd have to check in his book, which talks about all the cars he owned and when it did, because I don't remember that, even though he did list some very boring, regular kind of cars, along with his Maseratis and Ferraris and all the other things that he had. But he may have had that later in life. The mother was still alive at this time, and I don't know if he was cashing in on that. But that is interesting. It's also interesting that there's some sort of titleship. There's a cloud on the title. We're not really sure what this means. Listed as junk, then listed as another license plate. Well, that gets to be suspicious. Why are they monkeying with cars? Why did he have a rental car? It looks like he's trying not to be identified very easily, and he was using some sort of manipulative measures with the DMV, which probably passed a few bucks from, or after all, he was a military officer, got special treatment from the DMV in San Francisco, and San Francisco, like everywhere, is a very corrupt town. Goes on further to talk about his education, which he has a PhD, that's a doctorate, in political science. He got that from Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, and is a professor at the Golden Gate University teaching Western European political affairs. So that's where he was at teaching at the time these things are happening. And again, if those records meant anything, why was he possibly even investigated, or what was going on there when he claims he wasn't even there? How did they have a case against him if he was supposedly registered at this school? Doesn't that stop all investigations? You're alleged to do something, but, well, I'm 3,000 miles away in a school, and every day I go there, and I have a record of attendance. We don't care. We're going to press charges. Press charges? How would that even get by any court? I mean, all of a sudden, immediately, you are taken out of, regardless of circumstantial evidence. And, there are people that are on death row right now and who have been executed based on circumstantial evidence. I don't know how many people understand that. That's why I'm totally against the death penalty, because everything's all messed up. And, I used to be for it and think that it's not right, because the people are not getting justice. They're getting corruption. And here's what Aquino says about all this. Aquino is known to frequent, and here's another interesting thing here. And I don't know where did this police officer get this information from? Here's another very fascinating thing, and it's probably going to turn into a very long segment here, but let's get through all of this while it's still hot. Aquino is known to frequent prostitutes in San Francisco in order to become involved in various forms of sadomasochistic sexual activities. Although Aquino is believed to be bisexual, he resides with his girlfriend, and she has in parentheses, possibly Ford. They don't, his girlfriend is his mother, right? So this is how you run into stuff, and that this report to me, and I get this all the time, now becomes void. Is anything in here true? What information? So he's living with his girlfriend, possibly Ford, and they didn't look up that person's name. They didn't investigate who that was and show that, this is a much older woman. Or even trace the fact that this should be his mother, which would be on his birth certificate. No.
That's police work. Only Sherlock Holmes does stuff like that, though.
So the whole idea is just shows you the kind of bogus information from a so-called police investigator that doesn't do their research, because that would have took more time, and just assumes that because the property, and why wouldn't the property be in his name? I would wonder about that. Who is this Ford person? I'd be investigating that. Why are they on the ownership of that property and not him? Who is that person? Wouldn't that be important? What if it was Al Capone on there? Wouldn't that make a difference? I think so. And as he said, he resides with his girlfriend, possibly Ford, her children, and where did they get that from? And his mother. So they know a mother is there, but they don't really understand who the Ford is. Just she's taking the name as ownership there, that would be his wife, which would most likely, to extrapolate in any kind of a decent way of looking at something, you would think that would probably, if the mother's living there, would be mommy's property. And he's living on mommy's property, which he was doing. Living rent-free in a very expensive place that mommy owned. And again, we get back to substantiating the fact that she had money from somewhere, and we don't know where. Her family apparently was rich. Daddy may have been a big investment broker, and it's thought that she was in real estate in the 80s and so forth, which generated this estate that she left to him, which was $3 million or so. That included several buildings, even though it doesn't mention that this building was included. We'll go over what Aquino says about all this stuff. Let's go back. So they believe he's bisexual. They believe that... and where did they get that from? Prostitutes they talked to? I'm assuming they talked to prostitutes, and of course we know that everybody tells the cops what they want to tell the cops, and it doesn't really matter whether it's correct or not. I gave you information, give me a break, don't arrest me, don't do this, don't do that. We all know that working with informants is very tricky. So the whole idea is that where did she get this information from? And of course, none of the statements in her report have any validation of where she got this information from. Now, I don't know if that's typical of police reports or not. They just make statements, and the actual her supervisor assumes that these statements were verified by somebody and she got good information somewhere. Instead of writing, 10 pages on where the information came from. But it would be nice if there was a sentence of 2 to verify this. So she got this information that he's involved in S&M because that he visits prostitutes. So I'm assuming she talked to prostitutes that gave her this information. And how valid that is, we don't know. They showed him pictures of him and said, do you know this guy? He looks like Eddie Munster. He's kind of freaky looking. He probably wears all black. He may be identifiable fairly easily. And I'm sure there's a large amount of, a lot of prostitutes in San Francisco, which are, because there's a giant military bases around there as well. So people are going in there to have their fun times. We just don't know, and we don't know how reliable. The bottom line is that people want to give information to the police about people that they don't care about, so they get points, so they're given breaks later. And that information is dubious at best because it's done for a reason again, just like the person who accused Aquino had a $3 million lawsuit against the Army. So let's see what he says about this, and I find this interesting. And where does the bisexuality come from? That's another thing they threw in there to make it interesting. The informants, the prostitutes. He was into whipping and all the other things. And of course, he's bi too. So that makes things. Again, we're getting what I call the porn news. Exciting stuff that catches your attention, but are probably completely and unverifiable. Now, I'll tell you what Aquino says, and then I'll tell you what I know about some of this as well. What's interesting is, again, he contradicts himself and brings strange things here, where they talked about his intelligence status, etc. He claims, he's saying that why would being a military officer be sinister, meaning, But she didn't say it was sinister. He's saying that. She's stating that the bottom line is that what makes this interesting is that he's a military officer. He goes on to say that at the time of this report, he was not military intelligence. He was actually in the branch of the armor division, which is where he originally started off to some degree. He wanted to go into the armor division, the tank division, but he was not listed as military intelligence. Well, what the hell is he? He's a tank rat? You know, he's got this bizarre connection to tanks and Patton, etc., because apparently Daddy was in the Third Army and supposedly under Patton, and he wanted to go in and do the same thing, but he doesn't talk about his father in any way whatsoever. There's no information on him other than that paragraph that stated that. Now he's saying that at that time, he was still into killing people, not the, I want to be in the intelligence, and we'll talk it out. We'll talk it out, yeah. So, all of this is very interesting when you look at it and you know what's going on. You've read all his information. He also claims that the two officers he knew, Browning and Mann, were not lieutenants of his within the Temple of Set. Just individuals with their own interest and activities, except they're in the governing, and they are fellow military officers. I frankly doubt you treated them like the average person. Going back to the report here, it says, sources state that this cult has become potentially more and more violent as it recruits the less intellectual and more undesirable elements of people, such as former members of the Hells Angels and similar psycho gangs. Another rumor surfacing is that they are involved in animal sacrifices. Investigation into this group is continuing. Sandra C. Daly, policewoman, badge 1918 to, it says approved by her Captain Daniel Murphy, badge 647. So it's very interesting that these other things have been stated. And of course, again, this would be something that a police organization would know. Well, who's joining this? Who's talking about it? But it gets again to be hearsay. I don't really think that Hell's Angel types were necessarily involved in the Temple of Set, which took a lot of reading and other things. But you may bring in people. I mean, this is a military guy. He has been in combat. He's killed a lot of people. And regardless of him, I want to go peace dude, this is a guy who has very violent tendencies. It's interesting that several Satanists, including E.A. Conetting, was another guy who was a military interested person who was in the Marine Corps apparently and wanted to have a military career. He's also in ROTC of whatever in high school Conetting. So, I mean, this is interesting. So they have this background in knowing violence, destructions, and how to do things. Certainly, Aquino was well-versed on how to kill people physically and psychologically. So, but he likes to state things here, which just gives us more information on him. He's making a mistake doing stuff like that. So, apparently, so he wasn't intelligence at that time? He became it later, right? Well, that's not how he's ever said it. He's very rarely, he did make a reference to being in the armored division, I read in one sentence, but this has been downplayed as he didn't want to do that or whatever. So, but here again, he's trying to make this person look like they don't know nothing when basically, apparently at the Presidio, he wasn't in military intelligence at that time. Well, that contradicts a lot of things. What does that mean? And here are some of his responses here. What is perhaps the most striking about this report is such a vague, inaccurate, unsubstantial, malicious diatribe should be accepted by the San Francisco police captain and the intelligence division commander as a valid, intelligent document, which they did. They considered this, that she was a competent police officer, and the information that she gathered on this and everything else had validity. Now, we don't know. We also don't know if anything coming out of his mouth. He wants to do like he usually does and write 50 pages on a single thing, quoting Shakespeare, Jesus, and Satan, and the classics, and as all these snobs do. So, he wants to say that this was very poor. Well, nobody wants to read 50 pages, and I'm not sure that was much of it. She was left the report by saying, we're looking into it further, which means if we can find more information other than this and, quote, substantiate it, we will report back. That's what's assumed here. And, of course, he says, well, this is all prejudice because he's a Satanist, and, this was it was a goofy little report. And we just don't know where that information came from. So where is this stuff about they're getting violent? Where is the connection to these gangs and other things that they may or may not have been recruiting? We don't know. That's the kind of stuff that gets you into big trouble, the kind of things said about the Process Church and other things, that he was looking to get into this. And after all, he is a military organizer. He doesn't have problems killing people. He's already done it. So the point is, and God knows, he said he was in major firefights in Vietnam on numerous occasions. So there's been people killed. There has been some alleged activities, maybe with the Phoenix Project, which was an assassination group. But again, we don't know. That was a particular assassination group that killed almost 100,000 civilians in Vietnam. But he wasn't over there that long. So I don't know how he coordinated with, but his specialty was military intelligence. Not more direct assassinations. But, again, they all kind of mix together, and we just don't know military-wise what that means. What is him as a armor, military intelligence guy in Vietnam doing stuff? He was doing intelligence stuff in Vietnam, and that was before this. So he quits. And being a special forces, a Green Beret, he was out there in the front lines, apparently. So here we go again with all this very confusing information. To think that this guy is some peaceful guy that wants to resolve things with talk instead of weapons. Well, using psychological warfare, directed beam weapons, what do they call it? Non-death type weapons with his buddy General Alexander was looking into. All of these things that don't kill you doesn't mean that you're not highly traumatized by and are extremely painful and dangerous to you. Microwave weapons, beam weapons, all these things. So this isn't exactly all that. He wants to sit down and talk to people. I think it's comical. And I'll get into that book as well. I think when I read Mind Wars about 15 years ago, I found it comical to think that you could sit down at a table and resolve your problems. Everybody starts that way. It just never works. So I don't know what he thinks he's got special about it. So after this report, which certainly is stating directly, there's no inferences here, that they are turning violent and that they are recruiting violent people to potentially do things. I'm not sure. That doesn't make any sense, and I don't know. Unless you're going to operate like an outlaw biker gang, which has a very particular lifestyle, which he doesn't have, you certainly are not going to understand what exactly is going on there. In terms of that fitting in. But apparently what happened here was the fact that 2 weeks later, Daley decided to warn the U.S. Army about the Satanic peril. She telephoned Lieutenant Colonel T.C. Jones of the Army's Criminal Investigation Command in Falls Church, Virginia, to advise him that Major Aquino and Captains Mann and Browning, and Jones has been added here. I don't remember that being. Not considering this a criminal matter, passed it along to the Department of Army Counterintelligence. Possibly these are Satanists and could even be Soviet spies he's throwing in there. So she made sure she reported this as she should with this kind of strange information that you've got military officers involved in this strange cult. This cult seems to potentially be dangerous and everything. I don't see anything necessarily overly wrong with that in terms of if you're a legitimate police officer and you find something else, that you should notify the people that these people work for and who operate under. So that makes sense to me. He didn't like that, obviously, because of the fact that his cover, whatever little cover he had, was now fully blown. But nothing was done. So apparently this information was passed on to the appropriate officers at the appropriate places, and their response was that nothing was found out about this Temple of Set. They couldn't find any illegal activities linked to it. They also responded by saying that Aquino was given a top security clearance in 1981, and this basically was good enough for them that there was no background information to be worried about. And that's how it was left there. And the other two officers, we don't know what happened to them, but their commanding officers were contacted about this issue as well. It's not mentioned here, so I don't know what that means. Did they get disciplined? Did they have problems? Because if they did, he wouldn't list it. If they didn't, then he should have listed it and said, well, the other officers were cleared as well. He doesn't mention that. And again, that's suspicious. Aquino went to the police department and wanted to see the record. He asked if there were records on the Temple of Set and him, and they said yes, there was, but they refused to show it to him. So they didn't show it anything. He inserted his bylaws into the file on the Temple of Set to show what they were all about. So typical, but I guess, all that is to be expected. The fact is, it's very typical in the military and everything else that they're not going to do anything. This is an officer. This is a person who got a high military clearance. And if you were to look at it and say, well, if there was something wrong with this guy, they would have found that out when they gave him his high military clearance. They do investigate you. Clearances, from what I understand, and I've had a few friends go through it, generally the FBI goes and they call your friends and other things, and they ask about you, etc. So these are the type of things that generally do. So it goes through this clearance process, and I'm assuming a guy of his stature, in terms of what he would be accessing, was gone through very completely. And the fact that he was a member of a Satanic church, a Nazi lover, connected to all sorts of weird shit, absolutely meant nothing to the FBI and whoever gave him his clearance. This is a perfect guy to trust knowledge with. Well, we have to worry about his sanity in general. And their comment basically was that, that's his religion and we can't do anything against him because it's the freedom in the Constitution. Well, that's not the case at all. People who have prejudice against them don't get clearances for numerous reasons. The fact that this is plenty of information, his questionable dedication to what is a actual enemy of the United States, which is the Nazi Party. And by the way, I don't know if they still do it, but when you get citizenship in the United States, or they give you even a green card, one of the questions that they still have not taken off of that application as of the 90s is, are you a member of the Nazi Party? Are you here to overthrow the government? Well, first of all, the Nazi Party in the United States is legal. There are Nazi parties, and you can join it, and there's nothing illegal about it. Why that would be on the actual questions they ask you to get a green card and to come to the United States, I have no idea, and I know that firsthand from my wife. So the whole idea is that this is what they ask you. So, but that's okay. That's okay. Let's make sure that all of the officers are good practicing Nazis. This is the kind of nonsense that goes on, the kind of stupidity here. But to think that this guy is in any way should be given a high clearance is affronting to the highest level. The fact that the military did that is, well, it's not surprising considering what the military does in general. But this shows an unstable person with a bizarre belief system that could be blackmailed, that could be involved in all sorts of nefarious activities that are hard to define. And the fact is that this shouldn't be something that you should give people a high clearance for. People are turned down for clearances because they don't comb their hair right. And here's a guy that walks around like Eddie Munster or his Dark Shadow hero from TV. This is pretty. And supposedly walked around the Presidio with his little black jackets on and his way he combs his hair. This is quite obvious. And you can see that and that's why I pointed out, look at the cover of this book. Look at his haircut. This is not normal. So he looks like a vampire. And he is modeling his haircut after Barnaby from Dark Shadows and maybe some other things. So this is all the things we're looking at as the bigger picture here. And this guy is actually getting a clearance for this. So I would think that is absurd. But they're saying that's okay. We cleared him. It's fine. and there's nothing there to be looked at. I don't know what kind of internal investigations went on, but there was no flack from this from Aquino. He went on as normal there with the whole situation from what we can tell. Here's the fun stuff, and we'll close it up with this. It's going to take a little while, but here's the interesting stuff that happened when they actually got a search warrant for his house and what happened there. And this sounds like every particular police search warrant that's ever been done. It's the same old story. The same thing happens everywhere. And this is how the police do business. And unfortunately, I've had personal experience this with the criminal police departments, and that's what they are. But apparently, on the evening of Friday, August 14th, 1987, at his apartment here, I'm going to try and cut through this. But here's what's interesting. This is when they, quote, raid, I don't know if you call it raided, when they served the warrant, which apparently was unsigned. That wasn't even legal. I wonder if they got his address on it. Because, a lot of times they raid houses and it's got the wrong address on it, and they've killed innocent people. He states, I was in my study working at my computer while Lilith, his wife, and her daughter, were watching television in the sitting room. Well, this is some interesting stuff here. So there's not only a son that has been named, or kind of named. We don't know, because the information about his son, otherwise known as Damien or Dorian, it's been listed both ways online, was gotten supposedly from legal documents, but from a very bad investigator that we can't really go by, because it's just a lot of twisted information, but makes good headlines for that particular investigator's radio show. So we don't know how valid this is. Aquino is a very common name. It seems to be hooked up to a whole bunch of Spanish people who tend to use that, particularly Filipinos. Wasn't there a president of Philippines who was his name Aquino? It seems to be a very common, more Latin-y type name, not very Italian, where his father apparently was. But it's a very common name. You can find tens of thousands of Aquinos. So we just don't know here of what the story is. But while Lilith and her daughter were watching television, her daughter, not our daughter, her daughter. And it's quite possible, because she wasn't the youngest woman when he married her. She was the head of a grotto. She had lots of contact. I'm assuming after her quasi-modeling days, which she ended because of sexual harassment. What's new in the modeling, I just say. She didn't do anything to those troublemakers. She just went to Satan because she was pissed off, which is so typical. So this happened to the skeptic, the famous skeptic Schmermer, whatever his name is. He gave up on Jesus because his girlfriend was horribly crippled in a car accident, and he thought he was owed that not to happen. So basically, then he gave up on all religion because of that one instance. And certainly, is traumatic? Is that a proper way to analyze something? And that's the conclusion of it? Well, I have my great doubts. I don't think that's a reason to, if you're religious, to give up. There's a lot more reasons than that. Matter of fact, there's volumes of reasons. So, Lilith and her daughter. So you probably, apparently, there's some sort of boy child, the Damien Dorian, apparently is linked to his first wife, Janet, is what appears to be going on right now, who apparently has died, from what I can tell. I think she died of cancer as well. A lot of people have died in cancer, and his whole family seems to have cancer. I don't know what his father died of, but he's not in the picture here. So he died fairly young. His mother died fairly young of cancer. So the fact that he died of cancer seems to be part of the family problem. Now, Lilith, of course, is not part of his genetics, and she is in her mid-80s now, and apparently appears to be, maybe, is still alive. There's been no reports that she's dead. She is working with her hobby, which here we go again, as all the hobbies of Satanists are, is animal rescue. It's like a comic opera here. As I said, if you made a movie of this, people would probably laugh at it. If you put the, as they always say, fact is stranger than fiction. Then at 9 p.m., there was a knock on the front door, thinking it was to be her son or brother. Oh, man, here we go again. So here we're finding out that she has a son. Now, is that Dorian or is that another guy? Now, I can certainly understand him covering up the children because here's a guy that people want to kill. He doesn't talk about this either, and it would be nice to have a real autobiography that talked about the fact of people wanted to kill him. Assuming he got lots of death threats, particularly after these charges that were against him. After all, he is a Satanist, but of course, it is San Francisco. Anton LaVey had a lot of problems, apparently. People would drive by Anton LaVey's The Black House there and would routinely shoot at it. So they'd drive by in a car, shoot at the house. So this is something. So I'm assuming he had some sort of bulletproof windows put in, or the front of it was somehow armored so that these bullets would. But this happened all the time to LaVey. And, that's all the loving Jesus, we love you. And right here on this bullet, it says, Jesus loves you. And I'm going to shoot you with this so you get it deep in your body. Because I'm just full of love. And in my other guys, I go and smack people in the faces. Smack them with love. Smack them with love. I want to be a river of help. These kind of hypocritical Christians are just absurd. But here we go again. Thinking it to be her son. Now, she's sitting in the living room with her daughter watching TV, Lilith is. Now, her son, not our son. So, apparently, this is enough. So, apparently, Lilith had a daughter and a son, which, again, wouldn't be too understandable. Most people have a couple of children. Most women do. And if you're attractive, generally, you're having children by the time you're 20. Because, as I said, that's the way guys think they're going to keep a woman, by getting her pregnant and you paying for 18 years for the privilege of looking at her while she's with another guy. Or the Will Smith syndrome. Okay, so, or her brother. So apparently we haven't heard about him either. And again, we can understand why. This guy is in danger, and you certainly don't want to have a bunch of listings to people's brothers and everything else. And now Lilith's last name was Sinclair. That was her birth name, I believe, unless that was a marriage name. But she was married to somebody else, had 2 kids, and now Aquino's taking care of those 2 kids. She also has a brother, which is common. Most people have siblings. I would say the majority of people probably have siblings. And again, and let's watch the terminology here, thinking it to be her, not our son, her son or brother, who were both living in the downstairs flat, is how he puts it. How Euro of him. Apartment. Lilith opened the door, and why would you knock on your own door if you live there? I don't know. Well, of course, it's the downstairs flat. Maybe when you come up and they're separate, and a lot of these San Francisco's homes have multi-levels because the real estate is so expensive, you may have 3 apartments in one area. So maybe that was a reason for it, but apparently they had to knock on the door to get in. Because apparently both of them were living in the downstairs flats. It also insinuates that the son of Lilith was old enough that he was living on his own with her brother, so he'd have male privacy, and he wasn't living in the house like a child. Apparently the daughter is younger and living in the house more like a child. That's what we can extrapolate on that with just basic logic. So they knocked on the door, and she opened the door and found herself staring at a man in a suit holding a large crowbar. Well, you think that if, you would open your door in San Francisco after going through so many troubles, that, first of all, you'd be very careful. You would look through the peephole. I built an entire fence around my home in California to give people so they couldn't walk up to my windows or my doors. And I always am armed all the time. And my house was full of weapons in different areas, and it was a hobby of mine anyway. But you always have to be a little bit careful. You don't want to rummage around in your extra, with your screws and hammer. Oh, where's the pistol I put there? So the whole idea is you make sure you have guns loaded and ready to go. And I always had that in a close proximity. And if anybody, first of all, I stopped the knocking on my door by making sure that if someone came to my house, they had to go to my front fence, which is about 30 feet away from the front door. And I could then see them, and I had buzzers and cameras to look at them. He don't have none of that? So she opens the door, and this guy's standing there with a crowbar. If that was me and I opened the door, I would have shot him. But that's another day. But he identified himself as SFPD. Streets of San Francisco, Carl Malden. Boy, that dates me. Okay. Said that he had a warrant to search the premises and then walked in, followed by several other men in plain clothes. So, I don't know if he gave her a warrant, waved it in her face. Generally, they do that. It came when Aquino got there. He asked to see the warrant, and he was refused to do that. Lo's first impression when she got over her immediate shock, and of course, what's going on with these people? This is a military guy that's been to firefights, that's under pressure, and his family is in great danger to a large extent, and he doesn't seem to have guns or anything else in his house. I find that very strange. Here he's a guy, what military guy doesn't have guns? After all, he did have a gun in the end because he shot himself in the head, so is it supposed. I'm going to redo on that because I have some questions with that after originally thinking. But he was very sick with cancer, apparently. We can say that about 90%. But there could have been more to that. He was really shooting his mouth off. Then she saw two uniformed policemen bringing up the rear of the group, which, of course, always like to have uniforms so you can identify people, even though I'm not sure that that's necessarily good identification. Which appeared, so a bunch of other people came and appeared to about 10 people. She asked one of the policemen for identification. Again, they're walking in there with a crowbar, plain clothes. At which point he pointed to his shoulder packed and remarked, "This is all you need, lady." Ooh, snap a head. Throughout the entire raid, not one of the officers would produce any identification to respond to Lilith's request. And that's very typical as well. They don't identify themselves. They don't want to. They don't want you to have their names, their information. And in most places in the world, particularly outside the United States, you cannot photograph these criminals because they don't want to be caught. So this is the way it goes. So this is the typical thing. You think somebody would come in and do their business. Here is the warrant. Hand it to you so you could read it and verify it. And if you requested identification, that they would produce it. As simple as that. But this doesn't happen because of the nature of the way we've set up things and allowed for this abuse of power in every single way. And of course, when somebody breaks in, who are you? Prove yourself. What is this? You say you're that? You don't have uniforms on? Even if you have uniforms on, you can buy those around the corner, by the way. It has been estimated that there may be as many as 5 to 10% of the so-called police out there are frauds. That they're just people who bought uniforms. And you can buy the badges, you can buy the IDs, all that stuff you can buy very easily in the United States. So hearing the commotion, I walked out of my study and encountered the man with the crowbar, who waved a paper at me so fast that I could not read anything on it. So he just waved the paper in front of his face and so forth. And he goes into his room. He sees a guy with a crowbar. He heard commotions. He didn't grab a weapon. Where's his Nazi dagger? Wasn't Himmler there to protect him with the blood of the innocents on it? All of this, I'm sure this is correct, but this certainly isn't the kind of reaction that I would think a military man or anybody that was expecting trouble. It certainly wouldn't be either. So, while I wouldn't be quick necessarily to shoot anybody, I certainly would have made sure that I had weapons on me of somebody invading my house. And in California, you have the right to kill anybody who is a house invader, 100% legal. Of course, not back then, I don't think. I think that's a new law. So he just waved it in front of his face. He said that it was a search warrant and then told me to go into the sitting room with Lilith and her daughter, to empty my pockets on the table and then sit down on the couch with them and be quiet. So sit down with his wife and Lilith's daughter and be quiet. Empty your pockets and everything else. which is pretty piss poor way of checking if somebody's got a weapon or anything. Put it on the table there. I'll be out and about. I mean, certainly is very bad police procedure and not very safety-wise if you're worried about somebody doing something. The rest of the raiding party had already dispensed throughout the flat and were beginning to open drawers, closets, cupboards, and removing many of the contents. The photographer walked around the flat, photographing the entire interior as well as articles, art objects, etc., which were called to his attention. Accompanying the raiding party was a policewoman, whom I recognize as Officer Sandy Gallant, the FFPD's occult expert. As would be all evidence later, once my attorney and I had discovered the full extent of her well-poisoning activities, Gallant had apparently succeeded in convincing the PD that the temple set under my evil sway was a bloodthirsty, satanic cult just waiting to pounce upon helpless San Franciscoans. Clearly, when the person that accused him walked into his office to accuse us of the horrific crime, Sergeant Inspector Glenn Panoff of the Police Department Juvenile Division was therefore well primed to anticipate another Manson family spectacular bust. How else to explain all the muscle that he brought along with him into our home that evening? Well, again, that's a misunderstanding, Aquino, and you ought to know as a military officer that you always use lots of force to intimidate people and to have lots of people there. You got to remember the police department has virtually endless amounts of money for these kind of bogus operations, and they don't bring 3 people in there, they bring 10 or 20, and they go through everything, and they spend hours doing it. That's what they do. So that to think that this was an over amount of force is nonsense. That's how it's done. And you ought to know as a military officer that you don't go in there individually. You move large amounts of people in operations. But maybe he didn't get that, depending on what he was. Since he was an armor officer, maybe he was looking for a tank. So it's typical muscle, so it's a misinterpretation there, and he doesn't get what's going on because he's never involved with the police of any great extent. It's difficult for someone who has not been through such an experience to understand just how stressing it can be. We still had not the remotest idea of why this could be occurring or what judge would possibly have authorized such an invasion. Lilith and her daughter were severely frightened, and I was trying to decide what, if anything, to do. Presumably the raid had been timed for late Friday night evening to surprise us when we were most tired and psychologically vulnerable. That's right. Generally everything now is done at 4 o'clock in the morning because that's the one time that everybody is very tired. So if you're a night person, well, by 4 o'clock, you kind of get tired. If you're a day person, you're being woken up in the middle of your sleep and being disoriented. So it's usually 4 a.m., but of course, that's not what happened here. It was Friday night when everybody was relaxing and they were their most submissive, basically. The man with the crowbar, who I later learned was Sergeant Inspector Panfiloff, was crossing the room, crossing the sitting room, rifling one of Lilith's personal file cabinets. I asked him if I might read the search warrant. He refused. So he asked to see the search warrant, which is something he should have been given. And I asked him what the raid was all about, and he made no answer. Finally, I asked him if he could walk across the room, if I could walk across it to telephone my attorney, to which he nodded, okay. Fortunately, I found the attorney at his home and told him what was happening. He said that he would be right over, and by 10 p.m. he walked through the door, which is about an hour later. What did he say? It was at 9 o'clock, they said here? Let's see if I can go back here a wee bit. Friday evening, 9 p.m. So his attorney was there and was there at an hour later, which is which is pretty quick. It is remarkable how the presence of an attorney changes things in such situations. Well, that's right. Now we have someone that is not a direct victim who can make statements into the courts and other ones that is paid attention to, unlike the average guy. So the attorney showed up and everybody started acting a little bit different. Noting that it was The search warrant was unsigned. He read it and then passed it to me. All that I could make out in a brief reading was that it was evidence for a child sexual abuse. Being unaware of any such allegations, Lilith and I could make no sense of this whatever and could suppose only that it was a grotesque mistake. So this happened all before allegations and everything else were made against him and what was going on there. And he already stated he had no interest in going on there because it had nothing to do with him, even though this was a satanic abuse, and he should have paid attention to what was going on when he heard about it initially. But all these timelines and everything else are a little bit difficult to put together. As I said, if you're interested in the minutiae of things, get the book and read it for yourself. Meanwhile, there was nothing I could do but let the search warrant run its course. Following that, they walked through the flat, looking at everything, approached, so forth. In the middle of this night there were elements of surreal humor. First of all, of course, was the reaction to the police department, and apparently the FBI were there, to the exotic artwork and everything else. I'm sure that was. People don't know nothing. They're ignorant. So there's all these Egyptian stuff, all these other stuff that was there. And apparently it was amusing to watch these people. Oh, what's that, Bailey? They don't know. At home we have stills and hillbilly pictures. They got funny stuff here. Of course, this is San Francisco, and this is a sophisticated city, which has a long history of freaks and weirdos. But it's amusing there. The library of files in my study consisted of thousands of occult papers and books mixed in with military and academic files and texts. In a very short time, the FBI agents were totally at sea, meaning that they were into everything. One would pick up a book from Egyptian hieroglyphics or sigils of the Elizabethan period and flip helplessly through the pages, then to drop it to pick up something else, trying to look for something. Of course, they don't have any idea what this is. Of course, there was an occult specialist there, that officer. What she know, who knows? Maybe she read what was reported by Wicca. So who knows what their level of experience. Certainly, the average police officer would know nothing of this stuff. As reporters and police officers, they know absolutely nothing. And then, of course, they make ignorant statements. They had the photographer take pictures of my ceremonial robes from the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, and also my PhD robes from the University of California, which they evidently considered equally sinister. I was trying to make fun there of the fact that, you know, everybody doesn't wear robes, and they don't necessarily have them. I don't know why you'd have robes from. Well, maybe if you're a teacher, you'd have robes to go to events with, but the fact that you have robes is generally unusual, and he's trying to say that it's not. They photographed all of his stuff, including some Star Wars masks and everything else. And of course, yeah, they take pictures of everything, and what do they know what that mask is? And that's all part of the process that they're going to go through. Going through my files of photographs, they came across an album of snapshots showing men, women, and children. Let me go over this, because again, you know, he's writing stuff very poorly, and if people read this casually, they're going to come into problems. So going through my files of photographs, they came across an album of snapshots showing men, women, and children being tortured and killed in any number of horrific scenes, some involving the most shocking satanic orgies. The album was confiscated with great fanfare. I stood across the room shaking my head. In London, there is a very special famous twerk attraction called the London Dungeon, of which I've been in twice, by the way. A wax museum which consists, it's not really a wax museum, it consists of famous exhibits of occult and the macabre. I had visited a couple of years previously, and it was my snapshots of some of the exhibits that the FBI had found. Of course, he would visit that and take pictures of the torture stuff. Just gets back into his head again, because it's all about peace. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. Just let's get pictures of torturing, and let's have knives that murdered people from the SS. His heroes. So, Pamphilov triumphantly brandished a photograph of a laughing, naked baby on a bearskin rug. As, of course, some sort of connection to some sort of child porn. But what was stated, that's just Michael, said Sandy Gallen to the crestfallen inspector. Look at the eyebrows. That sounds to me like he invented that, but whatever. Next, he dug into a small tin in one of the closets and dramatically unfurled a Nazi battle flag, with the photographer, which the photographer quickly took a picture of. If you will look through the rest of the box, I said mildly, you'll see that it contains my father's combat souvenirs from World War II, including maps, his medals, and his unit and rank insignia. So, while he had this stuff, apparently his father had a Nazi battle flag, which he captured and took as a souvenir, which wouldn't necessarily be unusual. And, of course, he had his other things. And we've mentioned that his father was in World War II, apparently a sergeant, and, of course, he never mentioned that he was working, but I don't think he even mentioned that he was in an armored division. I'm not sure what that is, but apparently it was, and he kept all that stuff, as you think a military man would. Walking through the halls of our living room, I was confronted by a similar scene of disarray. Paintings had been removed from the wall, art objects had been picked up and played with, closets have been opened and the contents strewn everywhere. Yeah, that's what the police do. They don't look through it nicely and put it back. They rip it all out and throw it on the floor. This should be illegal. You're a suspect, by the way. You're not convicted of anything. They're looking for stuff to convict you or link you to a crime. After the first hour or so, obviously being clear to the raiders that as exotic our home might be, it did not contain evidence of anything criminal. The attitude of the raiders was a masked exception, with the masked exception of Pamphilov himself, who remained cold and aloof, became less aggressive and more polite. The two uniformed officers wandered around for a while, then left. The FBI left, which he didn't mention that initially, but this is the second or third time he stated, the FBI was there as well. Only Pamphilov, obviously frustrated, and continued to search. This guy thinks he's a magician, so he may have some good hiding places, he said. He remarked to another officer that he came to the mysterious coveted object. He removed the cover and confronted our Heathkit robot. And they took a picture of this, blah, blah, blah. So he's being sarcastic here, saying, of course, there's all sorts of stuff. At this time, Pamphilov had removed a number of our personal items and Temple of set papers to several bags and cardboard box. I asked to inventory these items. He refused to do it. As soon as the material was anything to do with search, or as none of this material had anything to do with the search warrant. He was taking all sorts of personal stuff. This is the other thing they do. And they'll steal money and everything else. This is what these kind of people do. So at 1 a.m., after all this, Lilith and I found ourselves standing in the middle of our house, furniture and everything strewn around, piled everywhere, everything messed up and everything else. Yeah, that's what happens. So very few people know this unless you've been through it. After Coleman took his leave, the last person to be there, Lilith, who had managed to keep her composure during the hour, finally broke down into hysterics. It was several more hours before sheer exhaustion overcame her fear and anger, and she was able to catch a few hours sleep. Well, obviously, these things are very traumatic. So basically, after this, he contacted his attorneys. His attorney stated that we need to get their incident report, what they wrote up about everything. This was the next step to do, and of course, that's what they did. I find out why they were doing this, etc. That was all part of this. They were doing this because they were closing in on a child molester or sex abuser, and that's why they were there and doing their investigations. And of course, they've been hyping up people in that particular area with this all the time. And this was, of course, part of this motivation to do all this. But there's some very good information here, and this is what you find out. I'm going to stop here. This is long enough. I wanted to not go this long in this particular area, but there's more information that gets into this. But what I wanted to do was to see exactly, to give you that information of whom the other people in Aquino's life is. And we now have documentation from him directly of what happened that night and who was there. Apparently, there's also a statement that his mother was somewhere in the building as well. I thought I read that the first time. So we have his mother living there, possibly. We've got 2 children of hers and her brother. She has a daughter and a son that were living there, and the way it's written is that it was her children, not his. There's still a basic understanding that there's some sort of Dorian or Damien that may have been his child with his first wife, Jenny. So those are the kind of things we're looking at if we're trying to follow and trace people down. None of these people have been contacted or in the media, and probably rightfully so. They probably don't want to. So this is something that, and I'm assuming her brother is her similar age, and he probably may be dead by now, since she's now, per her birth date, I think she's 85 now, and supposedly is still alive. Most likely her brother isn't. But we don't know. It could be. She may have a brother as well. The mother was involved in the church as well, in the Temple of Set, and she has passed away for many years now. So there's no information that can be gained from there. Apparently, we don't have any death on the father, but he has been gone for many, many years as well. So we have no information on him other than the fact that he was a sergeant in World War II, apparently in the Third Army, and was an investment broker, whatever that means, because that's a very general term. That could mean stockbroker, etc. His mother had money or developed money, was an artistic type. She studied in Berlin. This means there's money involved. You just can't go to Berlin and stay there studying art unless somebody's paying your ticket. So that seems to be part of the process as well that they all need to know about and investigate if we're looking for this. But, as time goes on here, this is a very old case now. Of course, Aquino's been dead for 2 or 3 years now. And so there's nothing to gain from him any longer that we can get any information from him. What he's written, and he claims that all he knows in terms of his practical information are in his books. This is what he's stated to other people. I find that hard to believe as well, because there's secret information that only initiates of the temple would get. But he claims all of his information, all that he really knows, is in his books. And I think a lot of it is because he wants to leave this heritage for others. And to think that's going to be passed on in an organization is generally not how things work. Once this new person takes over and runs it for a while, things tend to peter out. People don't want to run these organizations. They're not paid any money. It's a lot of work and hassle, and you're now the head of the Temple of Set, which isn't exactly a praiseworthy position for most people. And I believe there's absolutely no money in it whatsoever, so it's just a brick on your back. And it may be fun for a few years, but you get tired of it. So the whole idea is that his organization and the Temple of Set will get less and less impactful over the years, and his teachings will fall to the wayside. Another 15, 20 years, you're not going to hear any of this. So the whole idea is that there probably won't be a Temple of Set, or at least not a Temple of Set that he recognizes. But his work will be in the books he's written. Particularly, he claims that there's all sorts of information in those books. I don't remember that, his series of Mind War books. There's 3 or 4 of those. So we'll have to see what techniques he's talking about there. And of course, I don't know if the Temple of Set books go into rituals or other things and what's going on there. But as I said, most of this in any kind of organization, these are for members only, and they're not given out to the public. So I don't know what he's written or not written, but we'll find out. But there's very, very interesting information here. Not only is there a son, but there's a daughter, if this is her son, Damien. She has a daughter as well, who we must assume is of similar years. 2, 3, 5 years difference. And there doesn't seem, now she may have contact with her daughter, why there's a problem. Now, to recap what's happened with the son there, now we don't know if it's the son from the first or he's talking about this person who is Lilith's son, which I tend to think it may be. This may be Lilith's son, this Damien guy, and not from his first marriage. I don't know. And we just don't know either. There is some supposed lawsuit that has been filed because nobody informed him that his father died, nor was he notified by an attorney, and his estate was not talked to him about. I don't know if he was due anything. I don't know if he expected money, but he filed a lawsuit because nobody talked to him. Nobody said anything. So this son, whoever it may be, and it could be estranged because it was his first wife. So his second wife is not going to see his son by his first wife with much importance. So why notify him of anything? And secondly, it's old information. Unless he was expected to get things, your estate goes to your wife. So when Aquino died, per California law, she first of all owns 50% of it. At the time of his death, she owns 100% of it. So unless he left a will stating that X gets X, which doesn't seem to be the case because he doesn't seem to have good contact with his children, and they weren't even notified of his death, well, this clouds everything up. And why is this? Why is there problems there? What about her daughter and her son? And is there a third one in terms of that? Now, I'm not sure how important that is, but it would be interesting. And interesting is the key word, to get their feedback on what was going on through this and their feelings to their father. Now, interesting is the key word because what does that mean? They have axes to grind. They hated their father. They loved their father. So if they hated their father, they talk shit about him, even make up things. If they loved him, they cover up for him. So does that information have any validity? And we got to understand all that. Unless something can be third-party verified, and even there we have problems, but unless there's some way to find an impartial person to comment on that, we really can't take anybody's opinion whether they love them or not. We had this with the Process Church recently, where one of the children who grew up in that church, who's now a Mormon, one cult to the other, wrote a book on what he went through as of that. It was nothing more than being in a negative, nasty cult. And they're all negative, nasty cults. They all treat their people horribly, and the children are treated as second-class citizens. It's the same old story. And he didn't mention anything about negative practices, Satanism, or what's going on, etc. He wasn't going to break that open. I don't think there was anything to report. He reported being in a alienated environment without his parents, lacking love, and being treated kind of like you're in a British private school. So I guess if he was in England, he would have had a lot of money to go to that environment where he was treated like garbage and beat and everything else. Well, of course, in British schools, you can have all the buggery you want and a cup of tea. So the whole idea is that this is the reality of what's going on in these areas. So it's very difficult to find the truth, and that's what we have to look for here. So even if his son comes out and says he was the scourge of the world, that he did molest children, is that a valid statement from a guy who wasn't told that he was even dead, didn't have contact with his father, apparently wasn't left anything? How is he supporting himself? What is his job? Who knows? And as he said, Aquino is a very common name, so if you want to track anybody, good luck. They're all over the world. So whether he says his dad was the temple of virtue or the demon of slime, I'm not sure we can believe any of that because he is alienated. He's suing his mother now for access to the estate, which I'm assuming is relatively sizable. I don't know what he accumulated after that, but he had several buildings which, when they were given to him at that time, in, what is that, the 80s, were worth $3.5 million. In present times, these could be worth $15,000, $20,000, maybe more, considering how real estate prices in Northern California, San Francisco, the Bay Area as it's called, have skyrocketed. So there could be $20 million worth of assets here that are sitting there that is owned legally by, I don't know if it's his mother or whatever it is, but Lilith Aquino owns these assets 100% per California law, unless there is a will that states differently. And of course, that's what this guy is trying to find. He's trying to find out, well, what happened? Is anything due to me? What was the will? And all this he's been closed out of. So needless to say, he's no longer impartial. He's now an enraged relative, which means anything that he says is invalid. Now, why he wouldn't be able to talk about these issues while this is pending in court, I don't really know. Seems to me that the issues involved here, he could talk what he wants unless he's going to talk a lot of trash. So I don't know. He wants to, apparently, by this really bad reporter that has stated all this stuff, and of course claims he has talked to this guy, who doesn't want to come forward right now because he's got a case pending. Of course, all that makes sense. But you got to remember that legal documents are nothing more than a person's opinion to try and get what they want. The court is supposed to verify whether this is a legal, whether someone's telling the truth, whether it's a just claim. So you can write anything you want there in a legal document because of the fact that that's what it is. And you're claiming things, and it has to be proven and prove if you have a valid claim, which then we're. So we don't know. We don't know what's happening there. We know nothing about it. We have found out that at this particular time that there are at least 2 children, her children, and possibly a third. Now, their names weren't given either. He's used the term son, daughter. Nobody's name was given there. So he didn't say, so he said Lilith was sitting there with her daughter, and then her son showed up, and her brother. Nobody was given any names there, and I'm sure he did that deliberately. I'm not even sure why he mentioned that other than to try and keep things straight, because that's going to be in the police report. So if we were able to get the official police report, we would have the names of who was there. Meaning we would at least get the name of her daughter and what her legal name was. But that was not reproduced and so forth. And of course, there's a problem there as well because we're getting into editing again. What else is edited? So when you start editing, and I understand why you would do that, but anytime you change something is a problem because where does that begin and where does that end? So it's another fascinating. We've come into this. We'll go into what was taken from his house and the other accusations here. I didn't cover all that, but I will go into that of what was taken in the next installment of this. But basically, he lists everything that was taken from him that he could, I guess, remember. And people are under the impression because of pictures and videotapes were taken that this somehow was evidence proving their guilt. Well, they weren't just videotapes. They were movies. Rambo and a few other ones. They were personal home movies. None of them had any sexual nature to them. If they had these, it would be a slam dunk. And you think you'd have to be a complete idiot to keep incriminating videotapes in his home. So they take this, oh yeah, well they got pictures. Yeah, they got pictures, personal pictures. Yeah, they got videos. Yeah, but those are the videos that showed all the child molesting, right? Because these guys all photograph it and then keep it in their house. Usually they keep it in their wallet, so if they're ever stopped, somebody can look in there and find the kiddie porn. So this is all the kind of stuff that people extrapolate on, which isn't correct. So the things that are taken from him, the books and everything else, there was nothing there that was incriminating whatsoever. If they did, that would have been publicized, etc. So these pictures were his personal pictures, his pictures from the Temple of Set gatherings, which were all non-sexual in nature. And the videotapes he had were either personal videotapes of gatherings of the Temple of Set, again, no sexual nature to them, or actually commercial videotapes. He stated Rambo and he stated other ones, and I think even Star Wars. So the whole idea is that, oh yeah, they took videotapes. What does that mean? Don't extrapolate. Don't let your mind be infected by what other people tell you when you're thinking, well, they wouldn't take a movie. Yes, they would. They're trying to verify it. Secondly, they have to check that film. Is that it says Star Wars on the outside? Is it Star Wars on the inside? So you have to go through all that for good police work. They did do all of that, and nothing was found of any incriminating nature whatsoever. And that's important to understand, and he claims that he was taken by surprise here as well. Now, I'm not sure if that's true or not. He could have removed a whole bunch of stuff from his house that was incriminating. We don't know. He's claiming they just grabbed stuff and that's what they took. So we don't know. We don't know if he had prior knowledge to this. He claims he didn't, but we don't know. We can't trust anybody anywhere. As he said, he likes to rationalize everything here and has an answer for everything, that nothing's really happened. It's just the way it is. We're not into the military. We just have 3, 4, 5, 6 military high-ranking officers. There's no military aspect of this at all. It's just people getting together to talk about the Egyptian demon and to do rituals or whatever else. So there's nothing about that. And, of course, there was no military chat going on. And the fact that even the videotapes that were confiscated, they had 3 or 4 of them, which were military-based, Nazi-based. He's on film showing his dagger, his SS dagger. No, there's no military stuff in it at all. So he is careful to not show too much military because that puts him in a little bit of spot. But to say that here's a career military officer and there's no military aspects to it is kind of absurd. And he's already said the great love and admiration he has for the Nazis and the SS, and has movies and a whole division that studies that kind of magic. So, I mean, it gets to be ridiculous when he tries to cover up for everything. So that should it for now. We'll be covering more in the next installment. I mean, there's a lot to cover here. And if you're a person who wants the facts and wants to know the truth of things, you will carefully listen to this and take note. And if you really want to know, well, get the bloody book yourself. It doesn't cost much. And find out and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. I've been scanning it to a degree, going through it not super carefully, so forth, because it doesn't need to. We're trying to get a bigger picture here. But these are the things that people don't hear about, and you need to hear about it. You don't need to hear about it from people who are looking to fulfill their own little childish realities and don't want to get the facts from experts, because that's who's out there. People that, for some bizarre reason or another, don't want quality information. They want goofballs with stupid websites that write crappy books, and they want to report that because that's the porno news. Until next time.